good, yeah. So I'll just start off very easy. Just tell me your name and what you do.
I'm Kevin Whitehead. I'm an elected councillor for the British ward in Newport. Quite famous for having a lot to say for myself. But I think you're fine to do that as long as you believe in what you say.
Brilliant. I'll just wait till they bring the...
Somebody's pressing the bloody bell over that.
You're fine. It's just like, just tell me, right? I want to test how good your memory is first. Back in the day, you thought sort of early sort of 80s. Tell me about the Pearce family. Were they well known?
Yeah, absolutely. They were locally famous, I suppose you could say. Everybody knew of the Pearces, whether that be in a sporting sense or around in the city centre, really said. Then it was the town centre then, of course. Even if it was socialising around the town centre, you'd say, oh, there's a Pearce. He's the middleweight, he's the heavyweight, he's the... So yeah, they were well known locally.
And it sounds like from their father to the brothers, they were quite big characters, eh?
Massive characters. Walter, the father, yeah. I suppose it's through the eyes of the individual. My personal perspective, I used to look at Walter Pearce back in our days at Shaftesbury and Newport, all the marshes, and he'd stand on the doorstep and he'd have his body be oiled, he'd be in the sunset with his long glistening hair, and I just used to think he's Tarzan, just like Johnny Weissmuller. But he looked the part. He did look the part, that he'd sat over this like boxing dynasty,
That's a great way to see. Is that okay with the
I can hear it just in the background.
Just they've got there. Happy days.
That was alright, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, that's exactly. That's any details perfect. So that's the exact.
Boxing dynasty. Yeah.
So so there's this family with 7 brothers, 6 of them professional boxers. So you said they were the kind of people that sort of in the area people were aware of the Pearces, yeah?
Yeah, and I don't mean that in like they were frightened of it. They were just kind of like, there was a bit of respect, that these guys, because in them days the level it was, nobody had bragging rights military-wise or cars, and I suppose even now today, the Puerto Ricans, why are they so famous for boxing? Because if they don't win in boxing, they don't feed the family. So it was kind of, I felt that they would do well to make themselves better, and everybody has a tool, and this was their tool, and it was their way out of where they were,
Out of interest, what was like Pearl and Newport like back in the day?
Thriving, and like today, and for the right reasons. Newport was an industrial place, so you would have a lot of industrial traffic, very multicultural, everybody got on, and it was a hive of activity.
Do you have any recollections? All the brothers were successful boxers, but David particularly would go on his own journey. What are your memories of David as his kind of star was rising?
That everything he did never changed him. He was just still this modest bloke that would, you see him out training and brutalising himself, full of sweat. And as I said earlier, he's the type of chap that would run past a little old lady with shopping bags, and if she spoke to him, he'd jog on the spot and have a polite conversation with her. He was just a nice guy,
And there was something about David as well. Just describe to me in terms of the weight he was fighting in. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, we'd watch his fights, and you'd think this is like it's a mismatch, because he just always seemed smaller, like a foot and a half shorter, and giving probably sometimes 3-4 stone in weight, and you just think, oh my God, he got no chance. And before you finished your sentence, that ridiculous left hook he had. The sound of leather on a jaw is a great sound, and next thing his arms are raised. It was amazing to watch. What he did, he shouldn't have really, logically shouldn't have achieved.
Do you think that mixture then of the fact that he seemed like a bit of an underdog, his upbringing, his background, led to this kind of appeal?
I've always said it. There's this inherent hunger. One of the only sports women, I would say, that have ever alluded to that was Virginia Wade, where she said, if you want a Wimbledon champion, you need to go into the council estates where that inherent dog is. And I totally agree with that. And David was that type of character. He had the right name, didn't he? David and Goliath. And it just always, his fights were always like that. He always seemed to be fighting giants and coming up with the goods. Great fighter.
Do you think that at a time when, as you said, a very poor area, not a lot of money about, but David kind of represented something positive, and
you know, he gave others aspiration, I suppose. You know, you'd look up to him and think, well, I would imagine, I don't think there's any statistics, probably not, but I can imagine in them days that we did have thriving boxing clubs in Newport, but I can imagine the membership went up. I mean, I'd like to have, it'd be nice to get the data on that, but I bet that was a reality because he would have inspired people. And now, with a bit of luck, his statue is further inspiring people. It's a legacy.
Was it a big deal for him to become a British champion in the area?
I just remember the words. He said some words, but what stood out for me was he said, I did it for Newport. And we've used that as a bit of a tag because, you know, he said it, I did it for Newport. And that, for me, that's quite inspiring, you know. Hometown boy did it for Newport, it was fantastic.
He obviously was a very, very talented boxer, but his career was cut short.
Yeah, sadly.
He obviously kind of told he couldn't box anymore, and then he would later pass away at a very early age. Do you have any memories of the time that he passed away?
Yeah, the boxing fraternity in particular were grief-stricken, but it was a massive talking point. And the whole thing was tragic. His age, it was just so tragic. And the fact that he'd achieved so much, you know, what else would he have achieved? And then, because bearing in mind around that time, you had the emergence of people like Frank Bruno, Dennis Andrews. I mean, you'd already put Andrews on the canvas, the 6-year champion. There was strong rumours that Bruno's keepers were keeping David away from Frank Bruno for obvious reasons, his left hook. And I just remember talking to guys and they were saying just how unfair it was and how he would have gone on. And then the cruiserweight division developed and everybody's like, it just made it worse because he would have absolutely dominated that weight because now he's not fighting against people with so much more advantage over him and still winning it. So it was really sad. You know, even today people still mention the cruiserweight, he would have been undisputed.
The story takes a change and a bit of a twist then, courtesy of Luke Pearce. When did you sort of first hear and come into contact with Luke? I
just remember having like hundreds of messages, which I do get in my role. And I thought, oh, it's Luke. I knew him, because you do, everybody in Newport kind of knows people. I thought he's one of the Pearces. And it interested me, what was Luke Pearce? And fair play, from the moment of opening that first message, it just threw passion at me. And I just thought, oh, wow, what a passionate bloke, a knowledgeable bloke. And in fairness, since we've been like that, you know, I just really took to him. So that early initial contact, what did he want after you? He said, Kevin, I hope you don't mind me, because he's very polite, Luke, very persistent, insistent. I hope you don't mind me messaging you, he said, and peppering you, he said, but I've heard that you like my Uncle David, and you've been speaking with Andrew Collinborn and a few others about a legacy of some sort. He said, this has been my dream for a long time. I'd like to have a meet and have a chat with you. And like I say, I did get the odd word in because he was so passionate about what it was about. And the rest really is history. We became great friends and we've been through a big journey, you know. So what did he tell you his dream was? To have a statue, not just something on a board, not something drawn on a wall, but a statue of his uncle. And I thought, well, that's a huge ask, you know. We're going to have to speak to some people high up in the local authority for a start. There's going to be some barriers, you know. We're going to have to drag each other over walls, and we did. So just tell me that kind of process, because in terms of what was the initial sort of feelings about his idea? Well, you touch base first and foremost with the appropriate cabinet member for that area, which is sport, leisure and whatnot. So we did, and it was quite passionate, I'll say that without going into detail. It was a passionate conversation, but all the while it was obvious that Luke was quite calm, collected, and determined. You know, he wasn't fazed by the negative vibes the initial meeting gave out, and we both came out, gave each other a hug and said, game on. You know, and in the end, obviously, as we know, the council, fair play to them, they did come around, because there was lots to do. You know, there's planning issues, there's a whole host of things you have to put into place. There's the safety, even the safety around mitigating people climbing on a statue and falling because we live in them times. So there was still a long journey to go.
Do you mind just sort of recapping these kind of obstacles that were in your way?
Well, for starters, there was the sighting of it. Originally, we wanted it to, we had a lovely photograph taken there. We wanted it facing St Joseph's Boxing Club, where the marvellous Tony Borg, a brilliant coach in his own right, where his club is and where David had trained many, many times. It was facing Pill, where he spent a lot of his formative years. And we had the security of the police station. So, and also on that little island, there was a tribute to the mariners, and so it kind of all tied in. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be. And lo and behold, in fairness, the council came up with a fabulous site, which is where it is now, opposite Friars Walk, which is a very well pedestrianised area. So it's getting a lot of moving traffic looking at it, you know, and living it. You know, Selfie King, I think it is now in Newport.
And I suppose, you know, you found a place for it, but there is the issue of funding it as well, isn't it?
The funding was massive, and bearing in mind, everybody, I think even 5-year-olds now, some of their first words would be austerity, because that's what we're surrounded with. But Newport and far and wide come together, dipped into their pockets. We had so many fundraising events, and I was just shocked, really. You know, I underestimated the reaction to the generosity of people from all walks of life. I mean, you'd approach people with buckets, and you know, they didn't look like they had a lot. Oh, they found £1 because it was David Pearce. I just found that quite touching.
When did you first see the statue?
The pictures we had sent by Laurie, and I was like, no chance. This is too good. Yeah, I don't know whether you can understand what I'm saying. It just looked too good, because obviously we'd gone through the pricings and stuff, and we'd managed to do this deal. If it was cast in China, there was concessions for that, and all got a bit complicated there, but we got there. But I just saw a statue of this kooky-looking lovely woman with blue hair, glasses, covered in plaster, and where she's doing the prototype, and it was really exciting. I'd say I had a tingle. It was really exciting.
And when it was unveiled, how did you feel that day?
It's a stomach lurcher. I would say a stomach lurch, like, wow, just wow. Wow. And I suppose it was tangent, the ooh of the crowd that was there. I think it actually caught them out. The staggering detail, how beautiful it was. And this lovely, modest woman stood next to it who created it. She's a legend now. She did the fantastic Ken Jones. I've had a look at that. And again, her work is superb.
There was a lot of people there that day, and I spoke to some of them, and I got this feeling of that they were really pleased to see it.
Mission accomplished, yeah.
Why do you think there is this kind of deep-seated connection between David and a lot of the people?
Because it's a bit similar, I suppose, a bit romantic to say it, but didn't Tom Jones sing a song, The Boy From Nowhere? And he really was, you know, sleeping on park benches before a title fight. His whole story is against all odds, wasn't it? You know what I mean? And he achieved it, and then you have the tragic side of it. At the age of 23, he was stopped from doing it. So yeah, and to see the Pearce family themselves, that was quite touching. They've been stood around and kind of waiting and building up, and then just to see the emotion in their faces, I think for me, that said it all. I looked at Luke and I thought, Luke, all the years that you fought for this, mate, well done. I hope they're really proud of Luke Pearce.
And finally, you know, it's not stopped there though now in terms of what it's doing.
No, it's Luke being Luke, and Andrew Collymore and Joanne Berendi, Stan Berry, Rob Santras, Dave Wen. We got a fantastic committee, and so it was. Now we have the Newport Rocky Legacy Fund, which is doing brilliant things in Newport. I mean, you know, you'll have local authorities saying they haven't got the money, this austerity measures, and so they've kind of stepped in and put in money back in for Kids for Aspirations and to inspire the next generation. I think it's great, and we've given a lot of cash to a lot of good causes.
Great, that's perfect.
It's all right.
But that's exactly right. It's the nice thing to be able to speak to you and Bill yesterday, because it's just nice that there's actually people from the area who kind of recall.
Yeah, Andrew would be
start.
quite good, I would imagine.
Yeah, but is he a Newport boy then? Is he?
Andrew, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm probably going to do exactly the same
Yeah.
for you again. But you cool with that?
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, happy?
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, look, it's Luke.
Since back with the border control.
Oh, mate, that's perfect then.
But being honest, I was out of my depth then,
Yeah.
because obviously, you know, if I knew what I know now, it would have been a totally different dynamic. But
Yeah.
I took into a barrister, Andrew Taylor from Newport Chambers,
Yeah.
who's quite a high profile. He's always on the BBC.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember David putting his arms up on a table, and he had arms like anvils, and he said to Andrew Taylor, go on, punch one of them, you know, hand to me, you know. And he had arms like iron. But then it was very, very difficult, because the backstory is the cartel in London, Cllr and Lawless, because of Bruno. They wanted to protect. I'm not going to mention that, but I mean, there's if the truth about, I mean, Luke's out there.
Yeah.
If the truth about David, a warts and all documentary and a warts and all book about David would not be attractive.
Really?
Because there's a seedy underbelly.
This
You
is
know.
not going there.
No.
No.
I'm not going to be controversial though, because of,
No,
you know.
I don't.
yeah,
All I want
yeah.
is the sense that the bit I need to quite nail is this idea that almost his face didn't fit the time.
Okay,
You
yeah,
know, that
fine,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Right,
yeah.
okay. So, just first of all, just tell me your name and what your job is.
Right, I'm Andrew Collingbourne. Do you want me to talk to the camera?
To-
Yeah,
to-
Andrew Collingbourne. I'm a solicitor and managing partner of Collingbourne Henna Law.
Okay. Andrew, just tell me about, I suppose, your early memories of the Pearces and David Pearce.
The first time I met David was in 1989. He walked up the steps of an office I was then running in Maindy in Newport with his father, Wally, sat down in front of me and said, Andrew, can you help me get my licence back from the British Boxing Border Control? So being a boxing nut, I said, David, I'll do all I can to help you. When he was present with me, I phoned Ray Clark, the Secretary of the British Boxing Border Control, who wondered what my motivation was to help David. You know, are you getting paid? How's David paying you? And I said, listen, I love David. He's from Newport. He's passionate about Newport. I want to help him. I'm doing it on a pro bono basis, which is the legal vernacular for free, and I want to help him. And then he basically was very morose and non-communicative and didn't help at all. So I knew then we had our hands full in getting his licence back.
So what was the issue?
The issue was that David apparently had an irregularity on his brain that emerged during a scan. There'd been a number of solicitors before me, and I think David had opinions that said that what was actually wrong with his scan wasn't calamitous in terms of him being able to fight professionally. But notwithstanding that, the border control became entrenched and were not prepared to give his licence back.
Out of interest, what did you make of David the first time you met
He
him?
was very funny, he was very charismatic. I vividly remember him putting his two forearms on my desk, and the arms were like anvils. And he said, do you think you can punch, Andrew? I said, well, David, you know, we're having a, you know. He said, no, punch my arms. And I literally, it was like a Tom and Jerry cartoon. I punched his arm and my hand went back and juddered, and he had this big, broad grin. He was a good-looking man and he had a very sunny disposition. And when he smiled, his whole face lit up. So he could fill a room with his charisma, really.
Give me a bit of background about David in terms of his boxing pedigree, what kind of fighter he was.
He reminded me of a Rocky Marciano. He was quite small for a heavyweight and quite short for a heavyweight, really. But he was what Tony Borg recently described as being very heavy-handed. So he had, to use the old-fashioned vernacular, a dig in both hands, in the right hand and the left hand. And if you look at the footage, he could knock people out with either a right or a left hand. People who were much bigger than him, like Larry McDonald, Gordon Ferris, or he could finish people with body shots. So he was the complete package, really. Extremely fit, extremely dedicated. He didn't drink or smoke. He lived for the gym, and was in fact ahead of the time in terms of fitness and diet. And that's really stood him in good stead for long fights where he had plenty of petrol in the tank and he could continue to perform at a high level.
In terms of the time when David was boxing and certainly the kind of weight he was fighting, just paint a portrait at the time. Who were the movers and shakers?
Well, we're talking about the mid-80s. Obviously, Frank Bruno was emerging, and obviously I personally believe that the London promoters wanted to keep Frank Bruno away from David. If David had fought Frank Bruno at the time, he would always have a puncher's chance of knocking Bruno out. Bruno at the time was a big meal ticket. He had a contract with the BBC. He was being supported by the cartel, Barrett, Mickey Duff, Jarvis Astaire. if they put him in with David, David would have stood, in my opinion, an excellent chance of knocking Bruno out, because Bruno, as charismatic and popular as he is, was very, very chinny. So if David had fought Bruno at the time, I really believe that he stood an excellent chance of actually knocking him out.
Good, hold on a second. Lou, do you mind just keeping a little bit quiet, just picking up some of the voices on camera? It's okay, sorry. Yeah. Right, sorry about that. I just Right, so was it kind of like you know, a talented fighter, but almost like the kind of wrong time?
Yes, because his father Wally didn't have the connections. Obviously, heavyweight boxing was run from London, as I've alluded to. Wally was very much an outsider in Newport, and they didn't really have the connections that could have helped David move forward into the bigger time. The politics of boxing is very complex and multi-layered. Wally, his father, was a lovely guy, worked hard with David, they had a great relationship, but unfortunately he didn't have the contacts. So by not having those contacts, David wasn't quite frozen out, but he was marginalised, so he had to do everything the hard way. And obviously by beating Neville Mead, he was in a great place to negotiate and move forward. He had the European title fight with Rodriguez, and we all know about the count where he put Rodriguez down, and he should have won that. And then unfortunately everything imploded afterwards with the scans and everything that flowed. And he was 24 years of age at his peak. The tragedy of David is that really he was a cruiserweight, not a natural heavyweight. And the division then was very much in its infancy. Now I look at cruiserweights like Tony Bellew and whatever, without being rude about Tony, David would have just walked through him and knocked him out as far as I'm concerned, and would have made an awful lot of money.
Were you, I suppose, like obviously you're a busy man, you had a sort of a career that you were developing. David went through some tough times afterwards. Would that register with you or not, or would you just disappeared off your radar?
No, I mean, I was aware of David having a tough time. I remember buying a book by Harry Mullen of boxing quotations, and there's a quote in there from David where he paints a very grim picture of, you know, that he was basically subsisting on social security. I think it's a famous quote, you know, I'm not a brickie, I'm not a roofer, I'm a boxer and a bloody good boxer at that. You know, it's a very good quote, and it encapsulates the essence of David, that all he wanted to do was fight. He was unable to fight because they took his license away, so he had to subsist on state benefit. And obviously state benefit was very demeaning for somebody who had fought at a high level and had earned very good money for fights.
In terms of David passed away at an early age.
Yes.
When did you first become aware of Luke Pearce?
I was in the Crosskeys public house in Newport probably about 2 or 3 years ago, and somebody said, I was saying to somebody, I want to do a book on David Pearce. I said, he's the forgotten person in Newport. I'm sick of Newport being knocked. I said, David Pearce, I need to do a book. And there was a chap there called Gareth who was in the army. He said, you need to meet Luke Pearce, because Luke Pearce wants to raise some money to erect a statue. I said, you're joking? I said, well, what relation is Luke to David? And he said, he's his nephew or something. So I said, here's my details. And then Luke contacted me. He came in this office with Kevin Whitehead, and the rest, to use the old-fashioned cliche, is history.
What did you make of Luke the first time you met him?
He was very passionate. He was very driven. I didn't realise the amount of effort that he had put in to resurrect David in the public eye. I think he'd gone to Newport Museum. He'd had a look at the newspaper cuttings. He was very focused and determined that David would not be forgotten. You know, I mean, he's the only Newport-born heavyweight from Newport to ever win a British title. I mean, the only other Newport title holders were Johnny Basham and Steve Sims. So David had his place in history anyway. But obviously, in view of all the aggravation that David had had through his life, his journey, giving him the moniker of Newport's Rocky, it was an inspirational story on so many different fronts. No, not only to get the statue up, but for that to be a legacy and to inspire the next generation of Newportonians. So Luke has always had this bigger, broader picture, if you like, underpinned by David, and then moving forwards with the projects and the legacy projects afterwards.
When you what kind of obstacles did you have in your way to get this?
We started with 10 quid in the Angel. A client of mine said, there's 10 quid. Luke went and paid it into Santander. And I thought, we've got a bit of a battle on here. There's a lot of money to find. You know, the statue was going to be magnificent, made of bronze by Laurie, you know. The American sculptor living in France who Luke had found. And we thought, well, we've either got to just chip away, or we've got to be focused and driven and get a proper structured plan where we keep David in the public eye. And social media helped us immensely. The next time we went to the Angel pub, a gentleman knocked me on the shoulder and said, here's £1,000. And I said to Luke, game on. The Newport public are going to get behind this, we're going to do it. So we went from £10 to £1,000.
Sorry.
Change batteries there.
That's right. Yeah, I'm getting some
Yeah.
noise from there.
Sorry.
That's okay, no worries.
This is a little bit, I'll make sure it's, it is all nice and tight.
Okay.
Okay, so same again, I'll say, what kind of obstacles you can pick up on that £1,000, okay?
Yeah, well, we started off with 10 quid, and the next time I went to the Angel, a gentleman tapped me on the shoulder and said, here's £1,000. So I nearly fell off the bar stool. So I knew then that Newport were going to be fully behind this, and that David resonated and was so popular, and the Pearce family, that the whole of Newport were going to get behind us, and I thought this is achievable.
When it finally was unveiled, how did you feel?
Very emotional on a number of different fronts, really. Obviously, it's been a lot of hard work. The statue itself is magnificent. The image of David holding up the Lonsdale belt was very poignant for me, because obviously I remember David back in the day when he's doing the cartwheels in St David's when he's won the title. I think if only he'd known then what the future held, and it's a cliche, we don't know what the future holds, but at the time the future was bright for him, hugging his brother, but that was his finest moment. So where we've got the statue of him holding his belt, he's frozen in time in the best moment of his life ever. And after that, it was all downhill, and that's the tragedy of life. So his story is very human and very inspirational for other people.
You mentioned earlier that you were considering writing, well, you are writing.
Yeah.
Was that like a little obsession of yours?
No, I love boxing. I do freelance boxing journalism. I've written for various magazines. Ideally, I would like to be a boxing writer and commentator, not a solicitor. It's a labour of love for me. It's not going to be a controversial book. It's going to be a book of recollections from his family and friends, putting in context what he did with some great pictures, and hopefully to keep his memory alive.
What can you sort of identify? Because look, Wales has had world champions, European champions. It's got a strong legacy. David, a British champion, but he seems to have had a great connection with the area. Why?
I think because he was so popular and charismatic. People used to see him running in Bellevue Park. He always had time for everybody. When he won the title, there's some lovely pictures of him with children. He was he was from Pill when Pill was a proper community of hard-working people who always stuck together through thick and thin. And I think David, everybody could connect with David. He had time for everybody. He would talk to everybody, and he always had this sunny disposition. He was, despite his problems, a person whose glass was half full, never half empty. And I think that charisma and personality resonated with the whole of Newport, and they loved him. And that's why people got behind the statue. People coming up to me to auction items and said, that's for David, and I think Luke had a very similar experience.
Do you think, finally, last question, that there's something almost kind of cyclical in the idea that David was very approachable and friendly to everyone, wanted to help people, and now, he still will be with the charity?
Absolutely, yeah. And the memory, we want people to read about David, about what he achieved against the odds to inspire the next generation, boys and girls. It's a whole diverse project, really. It's not limited to boxing. We want to look at all sorts of sports. And already the Newport Rocky Fund has, cycling clubs. There's been all sorts of different rugby club. It's not going to be polarised into boxing. It's going to be a whole eclectic mix of sports for boys and girls. And possibly other charities as well. I mean, we're very ambitious in what we want to achieve,
And is that because, do you think Newport is quite a different place than back then? Yeah,
totally different now. I mean, there's a lot of complex problems in Newport at the moment. And obviously what we want to try and do is create a feel-good factor. People have knocked Newport for a whole plethora of reasons. There's issues about homeless people, empty shops, Amazon taking over the world, Newport perishing. What we want to do is say, hang on, okay, look what David did. Look what we can do. When you're down, you're not out. Let's move forward and let's try and drive it all on and inspire people to be the next generation and do well in their chosen field, whether it's sport, life or whatever.
Top man.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, Dave, and kind of your association with the project.
I'm Johan Berengi. I become part of the David Pearce committee. My association was I've known Luke since childhood. Luke used to babysit me, and along with Wesley Strawbridge, we used to watch videos with David when he'd fight from an early age. You know, I got to see David, and it inspired me, and I've had that affiliation, and you know, from a historical context, I've always been interested.
So just tell me again, so Luke used to babysit you, yeah?
Yeah, he used to. He's only a couple of years older, but my mum trusted Luke, and we'd basically watch David's fights along with Wesley, and you know, we'd mess around, play, you know, and it was just fun times and nice memories to look back on now. When we look at how far we've come with the statue and the charity, I always look back at those days fondly.
Do you sort of remember how fondly Luke talked about David?
Yeah, it was so clear that, you know, I would go as far as to say it's definitely one of Luke's heroes, and someone that Luke, obviously through adversity that he's had in his own life, you know, he draws upon that spirit that David had, where David would regularly fight men, giving away more than 2 stone. So it's a real story of adversity, and one where he's achieved his dreams as well.
So Luke used to babysit you, yeah? And then when did your sort of paths then cross in terms of what's been happening over the last few years?
Well, we've always talked and saying, like Luke would saying things out, but then he asked me eventually would I come along onto the committee, because I've done a bit with the social media and our element with hashtag Newport's Rocky, and I'd help with the event, so it was just a natural transition to help further in a more official capacity then.
Tell me a bit about, I mean, you've got a personal sort of experience of what it took to get this project, to get the statue up and running. Was there difficult times? Yeah,
there was setbacks along the road, but you know, the one thing Luke is he's tenacious, and I'm sort of similar in the sense when I've got a vision and a goal, you know there's going to be setbacks and bumps in the road, and it's similar to David's career, but the one thing that we'd never do is give up.
Why was that? Why was it so important for you?
For me personally, it's like when you've got a friend and you know that's their dream, you want to materialise that. So for me, the statue in itself, to see a friend's sort of dream come true, that was important to me. And also the benefactory of the statue is that the legacy side is where there's going to be countless children, amateurs benefit from the legacy element. So that was just as important to me personally as the statue itself.
Why is that important?
For me, it's giving people who might not get the chance. Like the David story is one where, you know, he achieved against the odds in the sense that he didn't have London back in, he didn't have promotional back in. It was an against the odds story in terms of weight, in terms of management, in terms of everything. So for me, if we can help people of a similar background who might not get opportunities, and put them so they might, even if it helps them a little bit, that's a success story in my mind.
Is, you know, I suppose for certain people, Newport's got a kind of reputation. Do you think that this is sort of is it a fair sort of a view of Newport, and do you think something like this helps promote the other more positive side?
Yeah, it's people will always think what they want to think, and you know, I'm a positive mindset, so you can help with these sort of projects. There's anyone can do these things, and if you're doing that little bit of good, it just helps to reflect a more positive light anyway.
When we were speaking to a lot of people over the last couple of days, you got a sense that the sort of Newport, and particularly the Cllr area, you know, was a kind of a thriving place, very multicultural place, yeah, but also kind of strong values. Do you think that, in a kind of way that via this project, those kind of values kind of still exist, kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely, because it didn't achieve itself by just our sort of tenacity and Luke's drive for the multiple years that he did create and set up. David's memory. It was born by the community all coming together, and without that it wouldn't have been successful. And you know, even in the legacy side, if people didn't attend our events, we couldn't help people. So that's testament to the people of Newport and how the affection they had for David.
What was it like for you just to see Luke on the day of the unveiling?
To me, it was like, for me, it was almost where I was holding back tears, because it was a big day for everyone. But to see a friend achieve their dreams like that, it was a special day. Was
it something that could you see that visibly with Luke, or because he's you know, this has been a long project for him,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, it was like a weight off his shoulders in a way, because you know that's David's memory is secured, and you know, more importantly, David's now a symbol for giving back to others who might not have the best start in life.
Top man. Is that cool? Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
The only thing, if I can, is just to try and get the Tommy Farr connection.
Right. Okay. So let's try and do this, because in a way, so I can just. I'll ask you, right, about your recollections of watching the films with Luke, and if you can get, like, you know, they told me that if he'd done this sort of thing, so
yeah,
so
I could then bring in Lilith and things like that into that kind of question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So essentially, so like you first meet Luke, and Luke's got this kind of like bombard you with films of his uncle, yeah.
Yeah.
So was that the case back in the day?
Well, what it was, we watched fights, and you know, one of the big fights in David's career was when he fought Rodriguez in France, and everyone sort of knows now the legend that he did sleep on a park bench. He'd had a broken hand, so he was against the odds. A football-sized ring against a boxer puncher. So you know, he was really up against it, but there was long counts, 13, 17 seconds. And, you know, Steve Lillis, who's a respected boxing journalist, rated David in the 10 most underrated British champions throughout all the weights. It's called it a dodgy verdict. And Steve Bunce, again, another respected boxing journalist, has come and said later that if that was in Cardiff or London, David would have got the decision and he'd be a superstar in modern times. So for men of that stature to go and rate that, you know, it's just a little bit sad that David didn't get the nod on the night despite the long counts, because had he won that fight, he could have potentially got a fight against the great Larry Holmes. And I'm not saying David would have won that fight, but the one thing David had was an equaliser and a left hook. And with a fight against two men, you can never say never. And he would have levelled and equalled the great Welshman in Tommy Farr in challenging for a world title.
Top man. Tommy Farr, funny enough, was one of the ones we did in that Valley's programme.
Yeah.
There's all footage of him out there, isn't it? Sort of,
yeah.
In New York he fought Tommy Farr.
Yeah, he fought Joe Lewis.
That's right,
yeah. So,
and like similar.
And when he could have won that fight, it was disputed. So I'm not saying David would have, and that's why I know that might be contentious. So.
Yeah, well, it's not contentious. Yeah. It's just your point of view at the end of the day. Like this is.